Good morning, I'm Deacon Greg Donaldson from Christ the King, and this is your daily reflection. Now today, as we have all week, we're going to be working our way through the 5 steps or practices of Carlo Acutis' roadmap to becoming a saint. So far this week, we've covered charity, Eucharistic adoration, frequent reception of the Eucharist, and today we're going to cover finding a spiritual guide and why that's important, and frequent confession. Now in today's readings, Bartimaeus, he was deeply aware of his need for healing and only could find that healing through Jesus, and he continued to call out to him in faith. Now at times, voices in the crowd, whether they were external or even internal, were telling him to remain silent. But he needed to seek that healing. So Bartimaeus silenced those voices and he appealed in faith to Jesus. Now people discouraged him from calling out to Jesus. Now if that happened to most people, they probably started to think of themselves as not worthy of Jesus' time. But he did not give up. No matter how much he was discouraged, he continued to call out. Jesus heard him. He answered his pleas and healed him and made it possible for him to live more fully. Now, what do you need to be healed from? What have you or all of us have been hurting from something in some way? And how can we approach Jesus so we can ask for healing? Well, Carlo Acutis, in the next step, as I mentioned earlier, helps us find a spiritual director and frequent confession. Now this truly shows how special Carlo was, because how many teenagers seek out a priest or a spiritual director to help them more clearly find out who God created them to be, or to help remove any distractions that may be keeping them from fulfilling God's mission for them. As St. Faustina wrote in her diary, "If only I had a spiritual director from the beginning." Carlo, his spiritual guide was not local. So every month he had to travel a great distance to see this priest. And when he got done, he wanted to cooperate with the graces that he would receive. So he frequently asked the priest for the sacrament of confession. Why? Did he just confess the little things? He did this to die to himself. He did this to perfect himself. He did this to help to be better at charity. Now he was willing to do this honestly because he felt the only one who does the will of God will fully be free. No, Carlo's spiritual guide, his director, on these monthly sessions was amazed. He was amazed because he saw in Carlos this belief that he had an exodus from his sins in a very, very firm way. Now, for Carlos, this came easier for him than most because he had an exceptional transparency, because he wanted to improve in everything, especially for his love of his parents. He did this to thank God and to feel ever more ready to improve. He received the sacrament of reconciliation weekly, happily to listen to the voice of the Lord because he trusted in God's infinite mercy. For Carlo, just as St. Francis did in a literal way, holiness involved in stripping oneself. Holiness is not a process of adding, but subtracting. Less of me to leave more space for God. To better understand Carlos' reasoning, he often used this metaphor. In order to rise up, like a hot air balloon, we need to shed weight. Just like the soul, which in order to rise itself to heaven, needs to remove small weights, which we call venial sins. If by chance there is a mortal sin, the soul falls to the ground. Confession is like the fire underneath the balloon, enabling the soul to rise again. It is important to go to confession often because the soul is very complex. So what is my challenge for you today? Is to find a spiritual director or a priest that you are very comfortable in confessing with, and confess on a regular basis. Now for me, once a week is far too regular. I'll allow that up to you and God, but whatever that is, just remember to pray. Pray to Carlo Acutis that you find a spiritual guide and that he helps you confess on a regular basis.